Good evening. If you have a mobile phone, if you'd like to put it on silent, please, thanks. Right, please welcome back Adrian Incledon-Webber with Elementals, My Dear Watson, working with nature spirits. Adrian is a published author, dowser, healer and teacher. He's a former Vice President of the British Society of Dowsers and past chair of their Earth Energies group. Tonight he delves into the folklore of ours and other countries and finds that nature spirits have been known about for millennia. Adrian shares how we can, if we wish, work with them for the benefit of all. Please welcome Adrian Incledon-Webber.
Good evening, thanks very much indeed, and great to see you all back here. Just very quickly, so I can get it out of the way very, very fast. Did anybody see the Daily Mail last Thursday? No? And that's all right then, good. I'm not going to say any more after that. That's it, finished, good. I can now start and talk about elementals. Elementals, my dear Watson. I guess as a youngster, I used to really enjoy being outdoors and was very much of a sort of rambunctious child, a sensitive child, but loved being outdoors. And people often will say, do you see elementals, do you see nature spirits? And I can quite happily say, no, I don't, but I could always feel them. You know, I could always feel that something was perhaps right by my shoulder and look round and not see anything. So it's kind of really a bit of a voyage of my discovery over the years. And I try to look at things in a very grounded way, a very down-to-earth way, rather than head in the clouds, as the article was last week. I tend to do things in a very grounded way. So we'll talk through. We have a break at about 9 o'clock, and then we're back about 9:15, a little bit more talk, and then any questions and answers, or any questions, and hopefully answers, we'll talk about it then. Okay. Really, as far as the elementals and nature spirits are concerned, you know, however you feel about them is probably true. And we'll talk about why that is over the next hour or so, hour and 15 minutes. They are very interesting and wonderful creatures to work with, and we'll just show you how as we go through tonight. Let's pop them through. A wonderful quote, we'll be able to read this anyway, a wonderful quote from Einstein. If you want your children to be intelligent, read them fairy tales. If you want them to be very intelligent, read them more fairy tales. Which I think is fabulous, and I must admit, as you know, Billy Goat's Gruff as a child, and lots of fairy stories that came through. And I would never imagine myself standing up in front of a group of people talking about nature spirits. So let's see what we can do. So, what's an elemental? The coin elemental was first brought up by Paracelsus back between sort of 1493 and 1541. And he looked at sort of the earth, wind, fire and water as the sort of four elements of the planet, and then started to look at, if you have the elements of the planet, are there any creatures then attached to them? And he then started to look at sort of fire elementals, the water elementals, the earth and the wind, and then built up a whole story. He would actually travel around a lot of these Scandinavian countries in particular, looking at their folklore, and then actually coming up with what he felt were the true nature spirits. So you've got the earth, wind, fire and water, and we will talk about ether a bit later on, which I think is one of the very important elementals coming through. So, spirits of the earth, what are they? Well, we've got the gnomes, which most people have heard about. These little humanoid creatures that live underground. Dwarfs live in mountains, associated with wisdom and mining and crafting. Pixies, believed to inhabit the underground. Trolls, some of my favourite creatures, are fantastic things. They can be quite bad-tempered, which I'll explain as we go through later on. They often live in rocks and caves. They can be very dangerous to human beings and also animals as well, which we'll talk about. Now, this is kind of living in caves is a very sort of kind of old-fashioned view, and of course, as we move into further into the 21st century, energy patterns are changing big time. And the same with elementals, they're not going to stay the same forever. And as we begin to think more about them and actually interact with them, so they get more and more strong, so they get stronger and stronger and stronger, and actually just become part of your lives in many, many wonderful and delicious ways. But trolls we'll talk about in a minute. Elves, magical powers, supernatural beauty. We've got fairies, described as humanoid in appearance, often with wings floating around the place. And we've got imps as well. Attracts not. They say they're not very attractive. I've got a friend of mine whose wife actually sees elementals, and she said they've got the sort of face even a mother couldn't love. So they're not the most attractive things in the world, but there is obviously beauty in the eye of the beholder. So sometimes you look at them and go, whoa. Otherwise, at times you look at them and go, yeah, they're lovely, helpful creatures, and they're just fabulous to have around. And we've got the goblins, which again we've probably heard of. Magical abilities. They're quite small, but they love gold. They love jewels, anything that sparkles. So if anything ever goes missing in the house, start looking at the elementals first and foremost. Don't blame the kids. Don't blame your wife or your husband. Often the elementals, a bit like the crows, they love gold. They love sparkly things, and things will disappear. They do in my house anyway, and it's not dementia. So my wife tells me. One thing I did actually put the slide in today. I've been, with my house healing work, I tend to work for people all over the world. And there's a lovely lady called Britt who I'm working with in Sweden at the moment. And I talked to her about troll paths. Her house was built on a troll path up in the mountains. They're always having problems. They're always having problems with running water, whether it's hot or cold. It always seems to block up. Whether it's in the sunshine or in the snow, there's always a problem. The lights always flicker, bulbs blow, and she just felt it was just bad workmanship in the house itself. Until we started talking about trolls. And as she rightly said, trolls mainly live up in the mountains, and certainly in the Scandinavian countries they tend to do so. But they will inhabit forests, and they will come down into villages. They're quite inquisitive, quite inquisitive beings. But she talked about the Nissa, or the Nisser, as people, and that was what she felt was the problem in the house. Now, I'd never come across this. Obviously, when I'm working, and I do try and do a bit of research into the foreign countries that I'm working, whether it's India, whether it's in the States, and I'll try and look at maybe what might have happened there in the past, some of their folklore, just to see whether there's anything there that I've actually missed that has why they're having problems in their house. And this is one of them. So, they are very similar to our nature spirits over here, but they do differ slightly in not just their appearance, but also what they actually do. But again, if you upset them, like any elemental, it's a bit like upsetting a bunch of 10-year-old children. You don't go out the house and leave them to it and say, be good boys, or, I will say boys, because girls generally are found on the whole tend to be much more calm. Is that right? Yeah, it is. 10-year-old boys if you've got a group of 10-year-old boys in a house and just leave them to it, they'll be all hell broke loose, and there's going to be stuff broken by the time you get back. And elementals will act very much the same way, as indeed these do. So they can help in chores, a bit like the tailor who'd always come down in the morning and find the suits were stitched for him by the elves or the fairies. I can't remember the actual tale, but they will help if you ask them to. Spirits of the wind, spirits of the air. Now, I've heard them. If you ever walk up on top of a mountain, certainly the big ones I've been to in Scotland, in Tibet, and into Nepal, you get up there and you can almost, I don't know whether it's me cheering or not from my mobile telephone, but you can often hear the cheers, this beautiful noise that comes through. It's almost like a singing coming through the winds. If there's a high wind, that sometimes you get the singing from the wires, the electrical cables. It's very, very similar to that, but you're thousands of feet up away from all the cables, and you get this most harmonious feel, and it's almost, they're almost joyous. They almost welcome you far more up there than they can do further down onto the earth, which is perhaps a little bit more dense. Hang on a minute, is it going to work? There we are, sylphs. You'll find them really all over the place. They are very much there for air quality. You can help them, or you can ask them to help you clear the air around your house and in your house as well. They operate at night, but even though they take the energy from the sun, They're always with you, they're always around, and you can talk to them, and they will talk back. And will-o'-the-wisps. Now, will-o'-the-wisps, generally, most scientists, I think, are now putting it down to marsh gas that explodes. But you can imagine back in the early days, our ancestors, we can't really imagine what they thought because we can't put ourselves in their shoes. They will have a completely different thought pattern to us today. But you can imagine living near a marsh, living near a swamp, and suddenly finding these amazing orbs floating around over the swamp. Yeah, you're going to look at the spiritual, or the nocturnal, or the darker side of things, rather than thinking, oh, it must just be gas igniting as it comes through from the swamp. Air elementals, obviously very similar. We just talked about with the last slide. So they're vital to our survival. We need them in our lives. If they weren't here, to me, the earth certainly would be a poorer place. The air would certainly be a poorer place. And if you call them in above the house, they will help. They control weather patterns. I like a game of golf. I'm not particularly good at it because I never play it enough. And with some of the spiritual work that I do with house healing, you're calling on universal energy to help when I'm doing healing on people. So when my sons come up, who are both much better than I am, I have to work very hard to actually beat them these days, I always ask for the appropriate weather for the game of golf. And I always would add the little sort of the codicil to say, look, I've been working very hard for you guys over the last couple of months. We're doing some great healing work. I really do need some nice weather over the next sort of X number of hours while we're playing golf. And I don't tell my kids because they all think I'm still. They're getting better, but they think I'm around the twist. So we were playing down in Milford in Surrey one day, and it was raining. We had a cup of coffee, and literally as soon as we walked out the front door, the rain stopped. We played a beautiful round of golf. We got back in within about 3 minutes, the rain started again. And it happens every time. So, always ask, if you've got something happening like a village fete, always just ask for the appropriate weather. That it really does need to be a nice, glorious, sunny day, but ask 3 times, because sometimes they just don't listen the first time. It can be like, I wish it was like this. If you ask 3 times, generally you'll get some good weather patterns coming through. And yeah, when performing an outdoor ceremony, we were doing a Spirit and Earth course in Brimham Rocks. I don't know if anybody's been to Brimham Rocks in the room. It's an most amazing place, just outside Harrogate, Ripon, that sort of area. It's all sort of millstone grit, but they're incredibly weathered, so they've got these most amazing patterns. We tend to think some of them must be human formed. But we were there doing a ceremony. We took a group of people up there to do a bit of blessing around the area. And it was raining, it was blowing an absolute hoolie. Until we got to the place we wanted to go to, we stopped and said, okay, we could really do with some nice weather now. And within about 30 seconds, the sun came out. But it was the colours on the heather, that all the droplets of water took on this amazing glow. It looked like a Christmas tree, all little fairy lights twinkling in the sunshine. It was the most glorious bit. Tim and I, my co-tutor, looked at each other and couldn't believe it, even though we'd asked for it to happen. And the ceremony took about half an hour over and done with. I thought, okay, the cloud's coming over, back to the car, and it rained. But it's lovely when this sort of thing happens. It kind of puts your faith back into the powers that be. And spirits of fire, so the salamanders. Now, these are probably the most difficult creatures to actually spot. They tend to live in the hot spots of the world, the volcanoes, hot springs, lava springs. That's where you tend to find them. So they're not good things to actually have in your house.